This family was basically attacked near uh, an old graveyard, and there was blood inside the entire camper. So I'm Steve Causey, and the way I first became interested in it is a story that I had actually heard some years ago that was regarding an incident that had occurred in the land between the lakes. This did not involve Bigfoot, supposedly, but involved what's known as a dog man. But in addition to that, I have a couple of personal experiences with my son having uh, witnessed a Bigfoot back near a small town called Westmoreland. This town is located north of Nashville, right at the Kentucky-Tennessee state line. And this is a known area a little bit south of Mammoth Cave, which has had a lot of Bigfoot activity. But I've kind of had an interest since around 1998, I would say, with that.
Was that your Dogman incident that happened?
Uh, I do not have a personal experience with it, but I was told a story on a fishing trip about an incident that supposedly occurred in the land between the lakes. An older gentleman had joined me for a fishing trip down here at Barkley Lake. At the time, I was living in Westmoreland, but I came back down here quite a bit to fish. And he related the story of the supposed incident that occurred in the land between the lakes up in the Upper Peninsula. I have since written a book on that, and it basically details the story that he told me. Now, where he got his information, I cannot attest to that, but he seemed serious. He seemed like he was credible. And I'm not even sure if that gentleman is still alive at this point. He was older than I am. But he related the LBL massacre story on it to me in pretty good detail. And as I mentioned, I've written a book on that, and it so far has had pretty good attention on Amazon.
Well, on the LBL massacre, and I have heard about that. That was a really horrific thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the story of the LBL massacre occurs up in the Upper Peninsula, and it occurred near a campground which originally was called Star Campground. That campground changed names a little bit later, and later apparently was just simply eliminated. They simply closed it, and they not only closed it, they tore the campground down, which is highly unusual. Uh, but I had heard the story that there was a dogman attack on a group of four, a family of four, that occurred in April. And the date is somewhat tentative as to the exact date. Most people think the exact date, from what I've read, was April 7th. Now, there is a little bit of a personal uh, corroboration, if you want to call it, that I can put to that date as well. I used to run a bait shop back when I first got married in 1982. I'd run it for about a year and a half. It was located at the lower end of the peninsula, down around the small town of Dover, Tennessee. It was right at the entrance to the LBL. And on a particular date, and unfortunately, as I state in my book, I cannot remember the exact date. I do know it was in early April. The park was closed, which is very unusual for the Land Between the Lakes Park to close. And the reason I know it was closed was I had several fishermen come back from the Land Between the Lakes, towing their boats, asking me if I knew why the park had closed. And of course, at that time, I did not know why the park had closed. And this was early April. I cannot say that it was April 7th, but it was very close to it. Usually, that is the time period that we had quite a bit of activity down the Land Between the Lakes as far as early campers going in and fishing. Now, this is the entrance to what is known as the Trace. And at that time, I ran a bait shop that once you turn off of Highway 79 was only about an eighth of a mile on the right, and I sold, needless to say, fishing supplies, minnows, bait, all kinds of things, and at that. A couple of things began to click to me once I heard the story. The story I heard from this gentleman was back in 1998. The reason I know the year and remember the year is that was the year that the University of Tennessee won the national championship. So it kind of made it easy to remember. But the story he related is that this family was basically attacked. Excuse me. Attacked in the area of the Land Between the Lakes in the Upper Peninsula near uh, an old graveyard. And it was a pretty active and nice campground at that time. This was one of the first families that had come into this area, uh, being early in the spring. April here in Tennessee, we have in Kentucky too. This actually occurred in what's known as Lyon County, Kentucky. And so in early April, you can have cold days, you can have warm days, you can have a mix of both. But it was still fairly early in the spring. And they were trying to get into this campground ahead of the crowd. So they got picked one of the best spots. Shortly after that, they had not been there very long. They were supposedly attacked by a dog man like creature. And this creature literally slaughtered the family. The father was severely mutilated, dismembered. The mother was killed in the camper and she was mutilated. In addition, two children were killed. One of the children, the young boy, which was thought to be about 13 to 14 years old, was killed right at the entrance to the camper. The door was ripped off of the camper and was only hanging on one hinge. The mother had been severely mutilated and eviscerated, and there was blood inside the entire camper. Uh, After a short while, as the gentleman recalled to me, the police started looking for a younger child because they found clothing which was for a young girl, approximately 8 to 9 years old. So they started a search with the personnel on the scene, which included several police units. The gentlemen that were inside the camper first, if I'm not mistaken, were two deputy sheriffs, and they were from Lyon County, Kentucky. They followed and started searching, and they didn't go but a couple of 100 yards approximately is the story I was told, until one of them started feeling something dripping off the top of his hat. He looked up, and unfortunately, this young girl had been hung in a tree. And what I mean by hung in a tree, she had been placed in the tree approximately 30 feet up, and she, needless to say, was dead. And he indicated that it appeared she had been eaten on. And what I mean by eaten on is a predator had taken this young girl up in the tree and eaten her, parts of her. She was disemboweled, and uh, the blood coming from the hand of her hand, which was hanging off the branch, was what had dripped on this deputy sheriff's hat. So it was a real gruesome crime scene.
Well, yes, that sounds like it was a pretty horrific experience. And what caused them to conclude that that might possibly be a dog man?
Well, the story as it was told to me is that they did not know exactly what had attacked these campers. Six coroners, a total of six coroners, were called in from various areas. Some of these coroners were from out of state. The gentleman told me one of these coroners was from Memphis, Tennessee. And since then, I have found out through a credible source that Memphis, Tennessee would be the district that would cover this part of southern Kentucky up near the Tennessee line. They would be called if there was an incident which required a coroner from a district area, and the district of Memphis would cover this area. So that was related to me. The marks they found on the bodies was the first clue, and one of the deputies had actually asked, "Did a bear?" One of the coroners, if a bear had done this, if wolves had done it, and it was stated that he just simply shook his head and didn't answer the deputy. But what they found were human-like hands, claw marks on the back of the father. There were four deep penetrations with uh, deep penetrations, maybe an inch or two in depth, with an opposing thumb, which was a lesser penetration, which would indicate a human-like hand with claws. Uh, and So, with that being said, it was quickly determined that this was not a known animal.
Well, they had to conclude it was something unknown, then I assume.
Correct. Yeah. They concluded that this was not a bear. The marks on the body were not uh, what a bear would leave. A bear leaves a more rounded uh, kind of print when it walks, and also it would take somebody with knowledge of what a mark on a human body would look like, and that's why I think they had to call in six coroners on this, because they were at a loss as to what this was. They were having trouble identifying what animal made this. And so, uh, with that being said, eventually it was determined that this was some kind of unknown creature. And the story as I heard it, which was related to me, and as I mentioned in this book, I cannot attest personally that this incident occurred, but I feel pretty credible about the person that told me this story. I mean, they weren't laughing, they weren't joking. They were telling it as a story. And needless to say, I had been fishing at the time, and I kind of put my fishing pole away, just left it there and listened to him. At that time, I was not certain I believed this gentleman. But over time, after having put things together, and I don't know whether you know the Beast Between the Rivers, written by Martin Groves. Are you familiar with that book?
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with that.
Yes. I spoke with Martin uh, and became good friends with him. And to some extent, I still had doubts in my mind that this story was true. But after speaking with him and knowing about the incident that he related to me, and he's also related on several webcasts regarding his experience in the LBL, not only did I become good friends with Martin Groves, but he kind of added another element to the story I'd heard that led me to believe that this could possibly be true. And as I mentioned, I initially was very skeptical of the story, but it was so interesting to me that I remembered it through the years. And then I think a large amount of interest in this particular supposed attack began to well up over a couple of years ago. And as that did, I recounted the story I heard. And there are also other people and other credible witnesses that describe what had happened and basically the attack that supposedly occurred in the land between the lakes.
Did the gentleman that told you or related the story to you, did he have any kind of a connection with this story, or how did he know about it?
I believe he heard it through another individual. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he mentioned that that individual was in some form of law enforcement, but he would not mention his name. I did not ask for his name. But supposedly, this story, was related as closely as he could relate it to me from what he had heard. Now, my understanding is if this is true, and once again, I have no personal knowledge that it is true, but there are certain factors that come together to lead me to believe that it may be true. One of them being the closing of the park in early April that year that I was working. I ran the bait shop. The second thing is the credible witnesses that have come forward. Martin has come forward and indicated that he was surrounded by dog-like creatures. They were, 7 feet tall from what he described and had dog-like heads. So putting all this together, I decided to write down what I had heard. And as I mentioned, the way I put it in my book is I leave it to the individual person who is reading my book to determine whether this is true or not. And with all those factors together, I began to realize that possibly this was a true story. There is also another lady that came forward that worked at a market, and she encountered these deputy sheriffs shortly after the event. And she can be found. There are a couple of different stories about her. Her name was Jan Thompson. She indicated these deputies had come late one night to her uh, convenience store where she worked as a clerk, and they were very upset. One of them was actually throwing up near the gas pumps from what he had seen. And they slowly began to relate the story to her. Now, Jan Thompson, I believe, is deceased at this time, but she, if I'm not mistaken, she had several interviews with different people, and I think she may have written her own book. I'm not certain on that. I'd like to get a copy and try to read it, but it closely related to the story that I had heard. Now, whether indirectly it came from her or whether it came from another source, I cannot attest to that. I just simply don't know.
Well, I think that's all extremely interesting. Now, Dogman has been known to be in that area. I've heard several stories about Dogman in that area, seen through all through Kentucky and southward. Have you heard the other stories about Dogman?
Yes, of course, there is Martin Grove's book, which is called Beasts Between the Rivers. Martin and I are real good friends now. I met with him, As a matter of fact, I owe him a great deal of credit for my book because he encouraged me to keep writing it. He also personally recounted his story to me, and I can tell Martin Groves was a former law enforcement officer and was a law enforcement officer for many years. And I can tell that he is not telling a tall tale. He is honest about what he experienced down there. There are many tales of different events in Dogman around the Land Between the Lakes area. Not only that, there obviously are other areas which have had dogman experiences. I think one of the more famous one is the Beast of Bray Road. There have been many witness encounters and sightings of an upright bipedal predator with a dog-like head. These are supposedly fairly intelligent creatures. They seem to know what a gun is. There have been some encounters that have involved guns, as I've heard it, and they seem to know that guns can do them harm. But at the same time, they're they're fairly fearless predators, is my understanding of it. And there are different accounts in my book. These are second-hand accounts, and I state that they are such of dogman encounters. Uh, from the people that I've talked to, I think they are credible. But once again, I do not have a personal account. I have never seen a dog man. I have been in the Land Between the Lakes on several occasions, and I have not camped a lot late at night in the Land Between the Lakes, but I believe these are primarily nocturnal creatures. They are sometimes seen in daylight, but they are primarily seen at night.
Do you know, basically, I know with Bigfoot, I've done a lot of interviews about Bigfoot, but with Bigfoot, there are telltale signs. There are various ways to know if maybe there's a Bigfoot in the area. Do you know if there are telltale signs about Dogman?
The signs that I have been told are that usually, from what I've written in my book and the people I've talked to, is there are several signs that you may have a dog man around you. One of them is the normal sounds that you hear in the forest, such as bird song, such as squirrels running around. You'll hear squirrels fuss occasionally, and you'll also hear just the normal sounds of the forest. They all become quiet. From the people I've talked to who have supposedly had witness encounters with these, is the forest sounds become quiet. And people also report the feeling of being watched. They feel like they're not not alone. One of the other signs is that some people actually get a fear that almost feels like they're in grave danger. That might be an instinctive feeling that people have from years ago. I spoke to a man who is a longtime trapper in the Land Between the Lakes. And he had actually read my book and he approached me about it. I did not approach him. But he said, I've been trapping since I've been 10 years old. And I know what every print looks like. I know what bear prints look like. I've been hunting all over. I know what deer tracks look like. Obviously, I've killed many deer. But he approached me actually just a few months ago, and he told me, I saw a track in the Land Between the Lakes that I cannot explain. He said it was about 10 inches long and it looked almost human like, but out an inch or so in front of it, it had obvious claw marks. These claw marks extended beyond the foot mark. He said it was not a bear. A bear track is more rounded. I've seen what bear tracks look like. This gentleman actually also related another story, which was very similar to a lot of the stories I've heard. He was in the Upper Peninsula, which is supposedly where this massacre had occurred. Now, this was a few years back, but it was certainly after the 82 massacre, let's say around, I believe he said it was 2017, 2018, I can't remember. But he was launching a boat up there. And he described that the normal bird songs and the normal things you hear, crickets, whatever's in the woods, normally when you're out, squirrels rambling through the trees and chewing on nuts and occasionally, if you've ever heard a squirrel out in the open, they have a fussing type noise. He said all that became silent. And as he was launching that boat, he had the feeling that something was watching him. And he said it unnerved him to the extent that he hurried up and got that boat launched. He said, normally I take a little time, check around, just kind of, get it out there and kind of get my gear together. He said, I had my gear in my boat for fishing. But he indicated to me that he sped up that process because he had a real uneasy feeling in that area. He said everything became quiet. He felt like something was staring at him, and he felt that he might be in mortal danger.
Well, that's interesting. A lot of people who sense there's a Bigfoot in the area sometimes get that same sense that something's watching them, that maybe they need to leave, even though there isn't any other indicator that other than they just get this feeling that kind of overtakes them. Have you studied Bigfoot at all, or is it primarily just this dogman and the LBL massacre?
I have actually studied both. And as a matter of fact, I took an opportunity. I want to compliment you on your channel. I took an opportunity to look at a couple of videos on it. One of them was quite interesting, and that's on the Sierra Sounds. I watched that just the other night, and the possibility that what Ron had recorded was actually intelligent chatter, which was recorded several years ago. I think in the 70s, was it?
Yes. Yeah, it was in the 70s.
And I found that quite interesting. But I do have some personal stories of Bigfoot. Uh, this was related to me from my mother. I used to live in the area near Westmoreland, Tennessee, which, as I stated, is north of Nashville and south of Mammoth Cave, which is pretty famous for sightings in that general area. But this area in northern Tennessee is known for Bigfoot sightings, and there have been several documented. But I had bought about 17 acres of land from a gentleman. I worked in Nashville at the time, and I've never been a person who really liked to live in a big city, although I have lived near Atlanta and Nashville for my job. And I bought 17 acres from this gentleman, put in a place there. My parents moved in a short time after that. They were getting on up in age, and we had a place across from the road from each other. This was a fairly remote area, and we had cleaned it up real nice and had a real I won't say it was a beautiful plot of land, but we were getting it that way. We had sowed grass, and I was in the process of digging a pond. I had a backhoe back then. I'd bought a used one. And this wasn't a stock pond, a large pond where I was going to put a lot of fish. It was more an ornamental pond. It was going to be about 20 feet across and I was going to put a bridge across it and stock it with some koi's and some goldfish and different fish. Uh, and as I was digging that and piling the dirt to one side and everything, I got the feeling that I was being watched. I even let go of the controls for a second, just left the shovel there, set it on the ground, and kind of looked around. But I had the strangest feeling that something was watching me. That is my own personal experience with it. I never saw anything, but I just had the feeling that something was watching me. Now, a few months after this, my son had gone across the road to my parents' house, and he was about 10 years old, 10 or 11, as I recall. I had taught him how to squirrel hunt, and for his birthday, I had given him a 20 gauge shotgun. And there was uh, what we are here in Tennessee call a hollow behind my parents' house that came up to a ridge a little beyond their house. I'm going to say it was approximately 100 yards back or 75 yards back. But I taught him gun safety. He was aware to assume that the gun was always loaded, all the stuff you tell your children when you're teaching them to hunt. And I did allow him to hunt on that ridge behind their house, but I always told him, do not go beyond the ridge, over the ridge where we can't hear you if you have an accident or you have problems. We want you to be within voice range. And so he was in their yard, and there was this hollow tree. It was a little more than a stump. I want to say it was about 10 feet tall. My dad had been clearing some of the land in there. This is one that he had not gotten to yet. And as kids do when they're 10 or 11, they're gonna play around and do things. So he had picked up a stick and he was banging on this hollow tree. And he was just banging on it, and he began to hear something coming through the woods. And he stopped banging and listened for a few minutes and didn't hear anything else. And then he continued as kids would, and he continued banging on this old hollow tree. Well, a few minutes later, he heard something heavy coming on that ridge across, and of course he had stopped by that time and looked across, and he saw a large black hairy figure coming down the side of that ridge. He said you could hear its footsteps. They were very, very loud. And my mother, rest her soul, she's gone now, but she grew up during the Depression. I know my mother is very honest. My father was a very honest person too. They would not tell you something unless they knew it was fact. And they said he came up on their back porch and was almost to the point of breaking their storm door down. They were afraid he was going to break the glass, and they quickly let him in and said that his face was white as it could be. All the blood had run out of his face. He said he was scared to death. He went in the house and he would not come out for a while. But he said he got a good look at this creature. He said it was coming across the side of the hill where he normally deer hunts. And I believe this was mid fall, so the leaves were down. He got a very good look at it. And he said that the creature turned over and looked at him momentarily, and he said it stepped his direction just for a moment. And that's when he got so scared that he was trying to break into the back door of my parents' house. And my parents, being old school, and always kept their doors locked. Even in the daytime, they would keep their back door locked. And he would not hunt, and he loved squirrel hunting. He would bring two or three squirrels home over a period of a couple of days or whatever he could find out in the woods, and he would not hunt again in those woods for the remainder of the time we stayed at that location.
Did he ever get back into hunting?
Yes, yes, he did. He is an avid hunter now. Of course, he's grown. He's uh, 40 years old, a little over 40 years old, and he loves to hunt. He hunts deer and squirrel, but he would not hunt at that particular location ever again. And we lived there a few more years before I had an opportunity down in Atlanta, and we moved to Atlanta. But my mother said that the expression on his face and the paleness of what his face looked like. We have a saying here in Tennessee. We always call it his face was white as a ghost, literally, is the way she stated it. Now, then, in addition to that, it's kind of interesting how people will. This is also in my book. I included the experience. Now, that is a firsthand knowledge I know to be fact because of the simple fact my mother and father I know were truthful and honest people. But in addition, I trust my son, and if he said it happened, it happened. But this area, as I mentioned, is known for Bigfoot sightings, and he got a very good look at this creature. He said the best he could tell, and of course, when you're frightened, things always seem bigger. But he said this creature was, 8 to 9 feet tall, from what he could tell. He said he could tell from the weight it was making thumping sounds on the ground, is what he called it. Was so heavy it was almost reverberating from the footfalls as it traveled and across the ground. The other thing he had mentioned is that it there was a felled tree which was across the pathway kind of. He said he cleared this tree with one bound. He said he did not have to do a double step over it. He said he was running so hard that he and these were big strides. He cleared this tree with one complete leap. Now I'm not certain, but I have heard that possible tree knocks and noises could possibly be a distress signal for Bigfoots. That may be a way they communicate over long distances if there is a some sort of a problem with a family member, but I'm not certain of that. Now, the second thing that I was going to mention, and I will get to it, is a few weeks after this, the gentleman, this was an older gentleman. He wasn't a lot older than I am, but maybe 8 or 10 years older at that time. Uh, had been an avid coon hunter in this general area. And approximately 200 yards down from where we had built the houses, this gentleman had sold me the land. After we told the story to him of what my son had witnessed, he related a story to me that had happened many years before then. But he used to be an avid coon hunter, and he had several good coon dogs. And there's a little valley that runs the entire distance of this ridge that my son used to hunt on, and it's a pretty long valley. Exactly how long it is, I can't tell you. I'm going to say it's probably a half a mile valley at least. It's a pretty long valley. Uh, he had gotten out one evening and was going to go coon hunting, and approximately 200 to 300 yards, he actually said, from where my son had his sighting. This was years ago. There were no houses back there. He still owned all this land. He had led his coon hounds out, and they pretty immediately got on the scent of something, and they started running down this ridge down the valley. And he was gathering his gun up and getting his gear out and started walking behind the truck. And he said it wasn't 2 minutes later till these coonhounds came running back up the hill. They had their tails tucked between their legs and they were jumping back in the truck. I mean, if they weren't hesitating, they were just jumping immediately back in the truck, which he said was very unusual. These dogs and most coonhounds that are trained that way, they had rather do nothing than coon hunt. They'd rather chase the coon. And he said only a minute or two later, and he and his, I believe it was his brother, he had told me were with him, heard something heavy coming up this ridge. And they kind of froze there for a second, and then they caught sight of a large black mass coming up the hill toward them. And they said they didn't make any hesitation in getting out of there. They jumped in their truck just as the coonhounds did and took off. And he related this story to me only after we had mentioned what my son had seen. So I think in a way people are hesitant sometimes to talk about Bigfoot because of the sheer criticism they may get. Anytime you talk about a cryptid creature, some people are going to believe you, some people aren't. And I have to relate back to when I first heard the story of the Dogman attack in the Upper Peninsula of the LBL. I was skeptical of it. I was one of these people that I didn't. It was interesting to me, and I clung to every word he said, but I was kind of like, this just doesn't sound like it could happen. So, uh, but if people realize you've had an experience that they can relate to, I think sometimes they open up. Now, this gentleman had not volunteered this information to me prior to my son's experience.
It is true. I think when once people hear a story or hear something that someone else can has had, I think it is easier for them to then open up and be honest with their own stories. I found that to be true many times, and on this subject as well as other subjects, that they're just reluctant to tell something that they feel would not exactly fit into our normal everyday life experience, seeing a Bigfoot or a dog man.
Yes, and I agree with that. And it's when you see something that should not exist, or something that you can't put together in your mind, not only are you going through the shock factor of seeing it and realizing that you're looking at something that the majority of people say does not exist, but yet it's right in front of you. I think there's a certain shock factor that goes through witnesses' minds. And once again, Martin Groves is a good friend of mine, and his book "Beast Between the Rivers." He does a good job in that book of describing the sheer shock he was in, and the mind frame he was in, looking at something that he had been told his entire life did not exist.
Well, I think that it's hard for us. We don't have a frame of reference in our minds to latch onto in order to explain that to ourselves. So we kind of have to create a whole new reality or a whole new paradigm inside in order to be able to even accept the fact that we're seeing something that's real.
Yes, and I agree with that. It's out of the normal realm. I was a television maintenance engineer all my life. I've been taught, how that certain things there is scientific method. There are certain ways you go about uh, witnessing or troubleshooting or doing what you're doing. But when people see uh, things that they can't put together in their mind, I can understand the shock. Now, I personally, other than the experience of feeling that I was stared at the same location where my son had later spotted this creature, have not had an experience. But I have talked to many people. There is another instance of a gentleman I talked to. This was about a year ago. This gentleman has done a lot of hunting down in the LBL as well. He found a track that he could not describe. And unfortunately, sometimes when people go in the LBL, most of the areas in the land between the lakes, and that's what I'm referring to as the LBL, do not have cell service. It's just simply too remote. So he had not taken his phone, which he wishes he had of just for the fact that it had a camera on it. But he came across a track. This gentleman I trust, he's been hunting a long time, which he could not describe, in addition to the previous gentleman I told you that was the trapper that been a trapper since he was 10 years old. This gentleman is a little older than I am now. I'm not going to mention his name, but I will put his age in his maybe late 60s to early 70s. But he has had a lot of experience in the LBL. He's killed many deer. He's hunted a lot down in there. He came across the same kind of track that I described earlier that the previous witness had told me about, being about 10 to 11 inches long with the claws in front of it. These are not rounded tracks like a bear will leave. These were more human-like footprints. So that's two witnesses that I've had come forward. This particular gentleman had not read my book, but he had somebody had told him about my book, and I happened to have a chance to meet him at a nearby marina, and I spoke with him a pretty good while. He wanted to get a picture of this, but he didn't have his phone with him. He went back to the same area. I believe it was 2 days later, but unfortunately it rained fairly hard, and he found just a little bit of evidence of the track, but it was not clear enough to really take a picture. It would not show up as the track he originally saw. And from what he described, this appeared to be a dogman track.
Yeah, this sounds like a very unusual type of track that's kind of part human looking, and then the claws, that seems very unusual. Even though I haven't studied dogman as much as Bigfoot by any means, but a few, and it's the tracks are the most common thing that's found, it seems.
Yes, I believe the tracks are probably uh, the one of the primary evidences that we have for dogman. There are a couple of different programs which have aired, and I reference a couple of those in my book. My book is called The LBL Massacre, but they're related to some television programs that I have observed. There is known evidence of Bigfoot that was retrieved, and it was retrieved in Canada off of an island. And I don't know whether you have heard that or not. Have you heard that story?
I have not. No.
Okay, there's a remote hunting. Uh, it's a remote hunting lodge that is accessible only by water or air, and most of the people that go to this area fly in with float plane. It's known to have very good deer hunting, and uh, known to be quite a popular area for those who have deer hunted in that area. But the Discovery Channel had done some research on this, and hang on just a second. I'm referencing my book. I wanted to find the exact so I could give credit to where credit is deserved. Okay, it's it's a show called Monster Quest. Are you familiar with that?
I am, yes.
Okay, it's the name of the episode was Sasquatch Attack, proven by DNA, season one. Did you or episode two? Did you watch that segment?
I probably did, yeah, because I watched a lot of it.
Right, right. And always enjoyed watching their show because they seem to follow scientific method and they seem real credible. It's not like some of these shows that I watch where people go out and beat on trees and make screams. I think that's probably one of the worst ways you can try to attract attention. I'm not saying it's necessarily not a good way, but I think these creatures are so intelligent that they're not going to necessarily respond to anything like that. And the other thing is, you're talking about a creature that's used to being out in the woods. This creature probably has senses that we as humans have long since lost. They're going to know that you're around long before you realize they're around, and chances are you're not even going to realize they're around. You could be, you know, 50 feet from one of these creatures, and if he doesn't want to show himself, you're not going to know he's around. But they had evidence. There was this cabin to get back to the story. There was this cabin that was broken into several times. They thought it was a bear doing it, so they set up what is known as a nail trap. A nail trap is simply a board that has nails driven through it that's set up in front of a door. In other words, it's raw nails exposed. Well, something stepped on this as it broke into the cabin again, and they were able to get DNA samples off of this. There was actually blood on it, and there was actually a meat-like material from a foot. They sequenced this several times with the DNA, and Monster Quest came back with, and this is also in my book, I include that and I properly reference their channel to it, came back as being 98.4% human. The rest was unknown markers in it. Now, people say, well, it was contaminated by humans. It's not possible to come out with a DNA that is 98% human. A human DNA is 100% human or it is not. Even if you went in and touched this and didn't properly get the evidence and everything, you would just simply see 100%. It's theoretically is not possible to contaminate. In other words, you could not create 98.4%. It's not theoretically possible to create a 98.4% DNA. So there is DNA evidence of Bigfoot that I think is credible out there.
Well, that's interesting too, as well. I think we're just about ready to end our interview today. Is there anything else you want to add to the story?
No, there is more details in the book that I've written on the LBL massacre. That the story as I heard it. If anybody wants to read it, it's available on Amazon.
What is the
But
name of the book
those
again?
are the LBL massacre, and it is available on Amazon. If anyone's interested in reading it, it's available by Kindle download. It doesn't cost anything if you're a Kindle member. And I believe it is $8.95 if I'm not mistaken, if you're not a Kindle member, but it is available.